All right, and let's give it a second. We're recording, but it's got to roll up for a second. Okay, we are recording. All right, Mike, what are you thinking about this whole borderline thing?
I'm very upset. I'd say extremely upset. I got some information that I wish didn't fall into my lap. That in fact there were some armed off-duty deputies, officers inside that did not engage the shooter, that fled out the back through a broken window. I know it's been some time since the shooting. I did not sit on this information. The day afterwards, I contacted the Ventura County Sheriff Department and asked for the watch commander at the East Valley Sheriff Station. This was on, like I say, the very next day. I spoke to who I believe now to be a Captain Garo Kurdijan, pardon my pronunciation, Kurdijan. And quite frankly, I could tell, it was my impression, I was not the call he wanted to have. I gave my condolences, told him I'm a retired law enforcement officer, a former deputy out there in Ventura County. And I had information to believe that there were officers inside the shooting took place that were armed. It was relayed to me by a reliable, confidential source whom I've known for decades. And that I felt if they had engaged, done their job, Sergeant Helis and a lot of the other victims would be alive today. And he just, after I got off the phone with this guy, this captain, I'll call him Garo, I just felt it was a smokescreen. I just, they were going to bury it. So I contacted a good friend of mine who was a command staff in law enforcement, who was as upset as I was. I talked to some of my military buddies and other Leo officers that just had the same opinion, that if you had officers in there that were armed and they fled out the back, didn't engage a shooter, saving these kids who were getting slaughtered inside there, and Sergeant Helis. And then you've got another victim, the CHP officer that, and God bless him, you know, that had the cojones to go in there with Sergeant Helis and inadvertently ended up through friendly fire killing him. I mean, that guy's, I pray for him every night, you know. It's another victim and the other CHP, along with everybody that survived the attack. So I asked this good friend of mine if he would make a call, because they're their officer with Ventura PD, so it would give more credibility. This all wasn't coming from one person, and he immediately agreed to do so. Called Ventura PD, gave him the information that I relayed to them, and got some two-stripers at desk that just basically blew him off. He says, yeah, we're aware of this, but we consider them to be heroes. These officers, they help break out windows and people escape out the back. And that just did it. I tried to contact news agencies. You can't get through to anyone. You know, you get voicemails and stuff. And every time I saw a video come out, a press release with this new interim sheriff who wasn't elected, who was appointed by Jeff Dean, who I actually used to work patrol with back in the late 70s at the old East Valley Sheriff Station, I just felt there was a big cover-up. I saw a lot of red flags, because when you have hero officers, departments are going to display them and parade them out right away. And the Chippies officers that made entry with them, there was never their names released, no information. They're not releasing how many shots were fired, nothing. And when I heard a month later that they just released that information, that just sent me over the top. I listened to press conferences where there was one gentleman who I sought out after, Paul Hubel with Crime File News, was asking some hardball questions to the sheriff about the deputies that were inside, if they were armed, or why weren't they armed? Is there policy prohibiting that? And it was just dodgeball with those questions. And so I reached out to Paul Hubel. I Googled his information, Crime File News, and we spoke. He's also a retired Chicago police officer. And again, I gave him the information I had, and he was on board. He was equally upset. So this is why, I'm trying to get this out there. in my heart of hearts, I was a street cop for 20 years. I worked SWAT. I was on the assault team, entry team. I've been in a lot of stuff. And I know I've almost been the victim of friendly fire SWAT training. You know, it happens. I get it. Don't have a problem with it. It's just sad. It happens. But and I'm just trying to collect my thoughts here. I get a little bit upset about this. Anyways, it just the more they're not releasing information, they've got videos. I've since learned that the whole crime scene of the Borderline Bar and Grill, which I lived in Ventura County for over 15 years. I've been there as a deputy sheriff on radio calls in the late 70s. I've also been there as a patron up to recently. That establishment has changed names over the years, but has basically remained the same. So, you know, it hit home to me when I heard about that incident. And I just, if this is in fact true, the information that I have, and I do believe it in fact to be true, the people need to know about it. Because what I'm hearing the sheriff Ayub saying is, and other people, is there, and there's been, I guess, a court case because there was a situation in Florida with the Parkland shooting where the deputies didn't go in and these kids bled out and were being slaughtered, and they're stacked outside the building with M4s and tactical vests, and a outside agency pulls up and they immediately made entry and into the building. We called them the cowards of Broward. It was Broward County. There's too much false bravado going on and people trying to cover their butt. And my passion is for the parents of these children. To me, they're children. I'm an old guy, young kids that were slaughtered in there. And I also understand 3 of them that were unarmed, in fact, did to try to take down the shooter, or subsequently killed, is just beyond tragic. And they may not be a legal obligation for them to act, but if they went in there and they were armed, they have a moral obligation. They have a duty to the community and to their fellow citizens. And they raised their hand and swore an oath. I don't care how long you have on the job to protect and to serve. And I have no use for cowards in something like this. And it's had me fired up for quite a while. And I'm not the only one.
I can see that. Yeah, that's definitely coming across, man. How long were you a cop? How long were you an officer?
20 years. Basically 1978 to 81 out in Ventura County as a deputy sheriff. I worked the custody division jail, then patrol out the old East Valley Sheriff Station. And then I lateraled out to Santa Monica Police Department, where I worked there for 17 years, retired on some injuries, and not carpal tunnel or stress, but, in the line of duty doing my stuff. During my tenure, like I said, I worked motors, I worked Metro, worked SWAT and the assault team. I did a lot of stuff. I was very busy.
And for that time, you were on the ground, I don't know what they call it, boots on the ground cop.
Yep.
You never ran a department or anything like that. You were actually in the middle of it.
When there's always a select few of guys at the termination point of pursuits or shootings, a hardcore group of guys that always seem to show up and are being involved in there. And I know what it's like to be stacked outside a door 2 or 3 in the morning to go in after a guy that swore he'd never be taken alive and is armed. I've been there. I've done that. I've run into situations I knew were going to be shootings, have a 3-star sergeant behind me pull off and suddenly get lost when there's no way to get lost. There's one way to go down. I've been there and I've seen it all. And I wouldn't want to work with any officers that pulled out on a situation like that to save those kids, or I wouldn't want them on my department. And I wouldn't want any command staff that wasn't taking care of that business. Because when I talked to, after a couple hours after I spoke to that Captain Curtigan, I believe it to be Captain Curtigan. If I'm wrong, you know who you are. Correct it. Yeah. Several hours later, I got a call from a Sergeant Dan Hawes, who, you know, I guess the captain directed him, and which kind of surprised me for that kind of information. It should have come from really high up, and they should have been right on it or getting back to me. And I told him I was not going to let this go. This is too big. There's no way. I want to know what's going on with this. And he just placated me on the phone and stuff. And I knew right there that, you know, they have the information and they're just going to sit on it or bury it.
What does it mean to you to wear the badge, personally?
It meant a lot. You know, you take an oath. I wanted to be a cop since I was a little kid, you know, with my interventions with them, you know, living out in the San Fernando Valley, you know, growing up in LA and stuff. And you have the public's trust, and they call you. There's no one to really call after you. You can call a SWAT team, but they've got a group, they've got to organize, they've got a stage, they got to do this. When you have an active shooter, an in-progress shooter, which all departments should be geared up for now with all the school shootings and massacres going on, they should know what to do. They should be, you know, you've got that. And I want to go a little bit on the dispatch tapes I've heard, because that's another thing that really needs to be addressed. You've got to go in. You've got to stage. And Sergeant Helis, he did that. And those two CHP officers, they did that. And they made entry into a situation where they knew they may not be coming back out of. When you're engaging a guy that's, you know, murdering people, and it's going on right now. And you've got to have your cookies in order to do that kind of stuff. And you've got to have a mindset that I really kind of see drifting away. People, it's just a job. It's I've heard people say, you know, I don't get paid enough for this. I've got a family to go home to, and da 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 da. And then, you know, these people end up promoting, going up through the chain. It's frustrating. It's a lot of responsibility.
I can hear that. I can see that. Yeah, let's talk about those dispatch tapes. What have you heard? I know nothing.
I can see why they haven't released them. As this progressed and I felt more and more there was a cover-up going on, I came across on a news site the audio of the shooting, the dispatch. And it had the seal of the Ventura County Sheriff's on there. And so I listened to it. And I know the call signs. I know the beat cars out there. It's been decades. You don't forget that when you do it day in and day out. And what I heard is when they put it out, they put what they call a 1033 in effect, which out there is emergency traffic only. And they put out like an ADW in progress, and then, you know, people are kind of talking and it's not really registering. Is the impression. I'm giving you my impression from sitting in a beat car for 20 years and rolling in on hot calls and doing this stuff. And then you know, the units are going like, what, 10-9, and they go, you know, we have shots fired in the Borderline Bar and Grill right now. Anyways, to make a gist of it, units are rolling in, they're setting up a perimeter, and I'm going, well, why are they doing that? You need to get in there and stage to go in the door if this is going on right now. And you heard, I heard, I believe it was 4 Sam 3 with his call sign. It was Sergeant Helis saying he'd arrived, he's at the front door, you know, with some chippies are getting ready to make entry. And there's a lot of radio traffic going on, and there's units out in like the El Rio area, you know, having some chatter and stuff. And it should be like dead silence on there except for the people actually engaged. And so Sergeant Helis says, we're making entry, or 4 Sam 3, I believe his call sign was. Can you see me? I've lost you.
I can see you.
Okay. He says, we're making entry. So there should be dead radio silence. When you've got officers and an assault team making entry, especially to an in-progress shooting or something like that, should be dead silence on the radio. Another thing I picked up is I felt, this is my opinion, that dispatcher's doing an okay job, but she was in over her head. Usually you will have a sworn officer or a sergeant come sit in the hot seat and take control and take over and make sure everything's going right, which was a concern of mine. As they're inside making entry, and he's going, we got a subject down, you know, in the front. and there's people on the back perimeter talking, yeah, I need more people here. Need more people on the northwest side, whatever. Yeah, you hear an officer on the perimeter going, we got shots fired inside. I've got multiple shots fired now. And that's Sergeant Helis being killed and engaging the suspects and the chippies in gunfire. And then there's more superfluous radio traffic going on, and you don't hear quite a bit of time goes by, and you finally hear. I'm like jumping out of my chair listening to this radio. Like, what is going on? What is the status of those officers in there? And then finally you hear, I've got Sergeant Helis. He's non-responsive, but it just the radio, the tape. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Was a disaster the way it was handled and stuff. It could have been handled better. And I know people are going to say, "Yeah, it's okay. You're sitting there. You're retired. You're Monday quarterbacking this." Well, let me tell those people: when you're in the military and special operations, or when you're on a SWAT team, even as a patrol officer, you're doing radio calls, and you taught this. You always critique your calls. You always go over it. What could I have done to make this better? How could we have handled this? You always do that, and I'm thinking this is even more reason why they haven't really, one of the reasons probably they haven't released the audio tape, because that sheriff, quote, yeah, we have an ongoing investigation. He can release what he wants to release. The building has been fenced off with a fence. They've got a green mesh thing, I understand, going around the perimeter so you can't see in. They've got, security guards there. I don't know if they're armed or not. They're not releasing. They've got surveillance tape of all inside the video, know exactly what's going on. They're not releasing that. They're not telling, who fired rounds, how many, the chippies fire, Helis. I've always been curious of that. How many rounds did they fire? If any, how many did the CHP officers fire? I mean, it's something this big. The public has, I think, a right to know to some things. In most school shootings, they get this information out. And it's just sad. I didn't want to be in this position, but the information fell in my lap, and I'm not sitting on it. And I've made that clear to everybody.
And I'm sure a lot of people are going to appreciate what you're doing. In your experience, and this is coming from you, no one else, how often do cops carry when they're off duty?
I can tell you, it depends where you live, what area you're in, what your mindset is. I'll tell you, me, especially nowadays, I used to never really carry. I always had one nearby, but with all the crazy stuff going on and the school shootings and assaults on officers, I'm pretty much, armed all the time. Or if I'm not, I've got a gun real close by. It's better to have one and never use it than not have it and need it.
It's a good philosophy for sure. What, in your opinion, no one else's, obviously, what do you think the chances are that the off-duty cops in there were carrying or not?
I don't want to go into that. I don't want to go into hypotheticals. That's not my position, and that's not why I'm here. I just think, the sheriffs, they may not have a legal obligation, and they can control what information is released, but the public, their perception of what's going on, and they need to know that the facts, their perception is very important, and for support of the sheriff, and their opinion does matter. So they may not have an obligation to get all this out there or address these issues, but you know what? They're serving the public, and the victims, the family members, God bless them. My heart breaks for them. And the other kids, young men and women that were in there that were traumatized by this. You had one poor guy that was, survived the Las Vegas shooting only to be taken out and killed down there at the borderline. I mean, it's just sad. It's really sad.
Without naming names, the person you talked to who got you the information, were they related to some of the cops that were in there on the day, or friends of? Just trying to make a...
I'm not going to go there, but what I will tell you is Captain Kurtigan and Sergeant Don Haas, they have the names, they have all the information because I gave it to them. So somebody needs to contact them, or if a news agency wants to get a hold of me, they'll know how to do it through this tape. Won't be directly, but the information will be gotten to me. But I'm just concerned that everything I see is just telling me down to my core this information is factual. And when they're doing their press releases and they're saying, well, they're not required to be armed, and no, none of the off-duty officers fired any rounds, but they skirt the issue. Were they armed? Were they armed? And that's the game changer. If I was in there and if I wasn't armed, I'd be going out a window too. There's nothing you could really do unless I was behind him. I was at a position advantage and I could attack the guy from the rear, slam a bar stool over his head. I mean, it's all dynamic. Where are you at? What you're doing? But if you're in there and you're carrying, you're armed. You're armed for a reason to go into a bar or any place, and you're ready. You should have that mindset, because that's why I'm carrying a gun. If something happens, I'm going to intervene, or I'm going to protect myself or protect others. And that's the game changer for me.
Agreed. Is there anything else you want to say before we end this call?
Probably after we end it. But
we can always have another call.
My condolences go out to the family. It just breaks my heart. I'm a father. To the victims, to the first responders out there that did their job and arrived and have got to deal with that mess and have those images in their head and stuff. And to the chippies that went in there, God bless them. Thoughts and prayers to them. I want them to pull through and do good, and know that it's just sometimes stuff happens. When you put yourself in harm's way, stuff's going to happen. So what you have to look at is what is in that officer or deputies, what was in their heart, what was in their mind, what they were trying to do. And that's for any street cop, anyone who's been in a lot of life and death situations, that's what we look at.
Oh, that's wonderful. Those are wonderful words, and I do appreciate that. All right, I'm going to end the recording now.
All right.